Hello again, it's Matthew David, and today again is rich with blessings because I am forever in the blessing, and so are you. And we are here to declare that truth over your life and to bring forth the demonstration of the all-sufficiency, prosperity, and perfect vitality expression of movement that you are. Now, I'm just going to talk a bit, and I'm just going to share some of my thoughts, and then I'm going to do a teaching. And this is brand new. It's called the RNR method. The RNR method. That's a capital R, a small n, and a capital R. And it stands for the relax and receive. Relax and receive. So first I want to start off by saying how amazed I am by applying this formula. And I applied this formula to the existing 3-2-1 process that I use. If you don't know that process, go to my website at MatthewDavidHurtado.com and look at that first video, and then opt in and go through the second and third and even fourth videos. So why is this important? Why should you do this? Well, you don't have to do anything. But this is what I did, and this is what I continue to do. Remember, I was laying in a bed dying with Lyme disease back in 2009 and bankrupt. I didn't have anything. I came from absolute nothing. Worse than that. It was a very destitute and desperate situation, according to my lying and deceitful five senses back then, that were ensnared in the corruption of the lies, opinions, and belief of this world. You see, I know now that I'm a spiritual being. I never had a physical life, and I've never left heaven, and I am forever in the blessing. That's right, I am forever in the blessing, and so are you. But it wasn't always that way. So what I discovered is the wisdom that made the transformation possible. And I've laid this all out in my books that you can get. You can go to allow.ws and begin the process right now with the ultimate cheat sheet manual. That thing is a blueprint for being, doing, and having it all. That was written based on the transformation I made, going from that bedridden, bankrupt place, living in that house, 120-year-old farmhouse with box elder bugs crawling all over us, crying because I came home and I couldn't work because my body hurt so bad, watching them take my car away, and feeling trapped, isolated, alone, stuck in a prison, in the prism of my own mind. What I call the 666, the 6 degrees of separation through the 3 kingdoms, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And I was bound by Satan, as it says in the scripture. And that is what the scripture means. So I am forever amazed as I continue to apply that 3-2-1 process and using the techniques that I teach in my workshops to keep my vibrational set point on point at an 8 or above, because it's not what you do, it's the quality of what you do that matters. In other words, it's the seed that you put into that space, the now, that creates the harvest. And I'm going to talk about a simple process that I just received as a download from God for you. As you know, I am the minister of allowing. I have declared it. I have taken that position, received the call from God, and I am forever God's servant, your servant, giving you the bread of life, the truth, the wisdom that you don't have to believe at all. You just apply it and get the demonstration, and then you'll believe. And that's how I expect you to go forward when you hear this. So, just today I looked at my bank account and was pleasantly impressed and surprised, because I keep stepping up my faith game, increasing my tithing to where I receive my spiritual nourishment. And many people tithe into my ministry from all over the world. And I hold that space for each and every one of you, knowing that the same blessing that is poured out, the full blessing that has always been poured out, is demonstrated through faith. And when we sow our tithe, we are joining in the faith of where we sow that tithe, making a covenant, a faith covenant. And we are acting upon the scriptural Jacob covenant, the covenant that provides, protects, and promotes you when you are living in accordance with divine spiritual laws and principles. And the tithe is sacred. It belongs to God, and it establishes the covenant, which brings about order in mind, body, and affairs, and it provides the increase. And the miracle I want to reveal to you, and you may have noticed this if you are tithing and you have witnessed the miraculous hand of God, as they say. And what it is it's the recognition that man's wisdom is foolish in the sight of the Lord, because God operates outside of the 5 sense reality. So last week I sent my biggest tithe ever for a 1 week. I tithe every Friday, by the way, because I really believe that it's the most exciting, important time of my life. Every week I look forward to this because it is my prosperity. It is the key that unlocks all prosperity, because I put the seed of faith and I establish and maintain the covenant. And my cup runneth over, I promise you. Now, when I sent off the biggest tithe check that I have planted ever, I came from faith. And what that means, let me translate that for you. I know that the fallen state of man, through the mind, through the 5 senses, what I see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, is all based on lies and opinions, i.e. beliefs, of this world. That's man's knowledge. Now, man's knowledge is an abomination to God. That's why when we get haughty and puffed up in our earthly wisdom, what I call arrogance, because it's pointing your arrow through the G, that's the gnosis, that is the earthly wisdom, and you become a worker ant, a slave, because it puts you in slave consciousness. And that's what it means to be outside of the covenant. Like my mentor Mike Murdoch says, you're supposed to suffer if you don't have the tithe covenant. Now, pay close attention, because it's going to get good. You see, this is how God operates, and it keeps you uplifted in consciousness through the act of faith. I applied what I'm going to teach you, that God wants me to give to you, called the R&R method. And I looked at my bank account and I was blown away. I had all sorts of extra money in there. I don't know where it came from. I don't care. I took my attention off of that bank account for once. Now, I don't have a problem with cash flow. Cash flow is great for me. In fact, my tithes are in the 6 figures. I'll let that set in for you, just so you know that I'm not peddling fiction in order to try to defraud you out of a reality that you deserve, that's already yours. And it has nothing to do with that fiction that you call paper currency, credit card, Bitcoin, because that fiction is known to your 5 senses. That is the world of the Maya, the illusion. It's the world of superstition, of materialism. You see, last week when I sent off my tithe, I exchanged my faith in the world of superstition and materialism for the recognition that I am forever in the blessing. I am at one with God. And I applied the R&R method, and the demonstration was an all-sufficiency increase. In other words, I was blessed to be a blessing. So let's talk about it. Let me share with you what I did and what God put on my heart for you. The first thing is to recognize that willpower by itself, when it is derived from the 5 senses, it's coming from a place of fear, lack, want, and that is a corrupt seed. So what most people do in the business marketplace and all over the internet, and they validate it by their tongue, talking about how they're going to crush it, kill it, they're going to destroy it, they're going to blow it up, they're going to create an explosion. You see, this is all language of the 5 senses. Now, while I play in that world, and I have fun with it, and it's delightful because it is the world of sensuality, it's the world of fiction, it's the artificial matrix. And the password is violence, because violence is the culture code in the United States for sex, and sexual energy is electricity squared, and it's the same energy that creates a baby, that creates money, business success. And that's what the late Napoleon Hill was talking about with the transmutation of sexual desire. So the password to the matrix is violence. And violence arises from the 5 senses. The fiction, the false report that convicts you through temptation into agreement by getting you to confess evil amongst one another. And so I came up with this interesting acronym, And I'm not trying to be cheeky, but it works out just fine. And it has to do with when your mind jumps in the equation through the five sense reality with a false report, a fiction, to tell you the status of how things are working for you. And it rapes you. R-A-P-E. That's the acronym number 1. It relishes about past experience. It relishes about past experience. That's the rape your mind conducts on you. And it is inspired through fear, through lack, through want, through superstition itself. And the predominant fears are of dying, being alone, not being taken care of, abandoned, rejection, isolated. Now, the only reality that any of these fears have is in the five sense fiction. Ooh, look at that, I feel fear because I saw something in front of me on a bank statement or a debt or something on TV about some evil that's coming this way. Then I felt something in my body, mind, the fiction of the five senses. And lo and behold, I end up confessing sin amongst my neighbor, spreading opinion and lie like a cancer, like a virus. You know what happens. You run into somebody with the other acronym that I call a rat ass. R-A-T-A-S-S. Rat ass. They are resistant and talking about stupid shit. Resistant and talking about stupid shit. Because the truth is you are forever in the blessing. You are at one with God. You never left heaven. But when you come from the five senses, and that's important to understand, that when you come from the five senses, your mind will rape you. It will relish about past experiences. And you might look like a rat ass to somebody who's enlightened, resisting and talking about stupid shit. So it's really the talking about stupid shit that's the problem. Because what we validate with our tongue confirms our wisdom or lack thereof. Now, the reason why I use such crude acronyms is because you can't forget that in that memory bank of yours, because I have used a pattern interrupt with that acronym to get you to have an impression that you've never had before. You've never thought of yourself as a rat ass when you are speaking evil amongst others around you. Resisting and talking about stupid shit. Virtually everyone you know has this habit. So let's talk about it. Let's break it down. Resisting is the opposite of allowing. Resisting comes from the mind. Remember, I talked about in my book, Ask Until It Is Given, thinking in a series circuit coming from a serious mindset, which originates from a Sirius constellation. It's the Luciferian matrix program that was given to you from adulterated beings when you were innocent, childlike, impressionable, a blank slate. You were born into a world of fiction through a birth canal, handed over to a doc. And you see, this was the fallen state of affairs when a spiritual deity develops amnesia of sorts and comes into a five-sense fiction, becomes a prodigal son and returns back to its own abode, and receives enlightenment by dropping its resistance. The resistance is when you add thinking coming from a time-bound reality perception. In other words, if you believe that birth and your inevitable death to the five senses is the fact of who you are living in a time-bound reality construct. You are in time, consciousness. The only record of time that you know comes from the five senses. What you think you see is not. You see a car driving down the street, and it looks like 5 seconds ago it was at point A, and now 10 seconds later it will be at point B. Maybe it's the stop sign up the road. And you believe that motion or that volition is a linear progression. And yet when we look at the quantum physics perspective, we know that 99.99997% of reality is empty space. So we know that the vehicle that you saw at point A that's heading towards point B, and the alleged time that exists in your mind was never there, according to quantum physics. And then we look at the Vedic teachings. Infinite worlds appear and reappear in the vast expanse of my consciousness, like motes of dust dancing in a beam of light. So the universe is flickering in and out of existence. Now imagine if you had this flickering as a still shot picture frame, snapshot, like an old Kodak camera, where you take a snapshot and it comes right out, and you can hold that still image right in your hand. Now imagine if you took a whole series of those snapshots, and as you did that, what you saw was the car at point A, and then you saw the car between point A and point B several times, and then finally the car at point B. But each individual picture that came out of that camera was its own reality, in fact. And there was no motion until you take these pictures and maybe, let's say, you line them up in a progression series, and then you flash them in front of a projector really fast, like a movie projector does, and it looks like a time-bound reality. It looks like the car went from point A to point B, and the movie took 10 seconds in order to demonstrate that motion. And the problem is that's not how reality is, because God is omnipresent. In other words, the universe is flickering in and out of existence now, always. That's omnipresent. There is no past, and there is no future. Thinking itself creates past and future. And so thinking argues for time. Thinking argues through the who, what, when, where, why, and how for its own separation and its own destruction. Now, I can prove that thinking argues for its own destruction because man's knowledge always creates a science based on a phenomenon, and then it takes that science and it disproves it based on a new phenomenon. And so that is a death to the five senses of that very thinking process. So it forever destroys itself. And yet what is eternal is always true at all points of time, space, reality, as you call it. They call it the time-space reality. Well, the space is real. Now space is real. And then you add time into it, and now you have the proper understanding of who you exist as. A part of you exists in time. That is the fallen state of man or woman, mankind, that operates through the 666, through the five senses. That's the fiction. That's who Jesus was as the man. Jesus the man, time bound, discovered the space reality that the quantum physics point of view holds to be true, that 99.99997% of what we see as physical world around us is empty space, in fact, and that there is only one power, one presence, and one mind. God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. Therefore, nothing can exist outside of it, and there is no other power. And so Jesus declared that I of myself can do nothing, but it is my Father who doeth the work through me. Because Jesus was also part of a time-space reality. And yet, Jesus just circumcised the time to become the space reality. So now that we've gotten this far, you should be calibrating into a completely new vibration just by osmosis in being in this consciousness stream right now. Because Matthew David Hurtado of himself can do nothing. But that which is in Matthew David Hurtado is far greater than the Matthew David Hurtado that is in the world. And what I'm saying is, now that I have circumcised time off the time-space reality, I am coming from the space reality, as in the awareness, the consciousness that 99.99997% of what I hear, taste, touch, smell, and see is in fact an illusion, a lie. It's empty space. My five senses are giving me the feedback of this illusion. And what programmed my five senses were the lies, opinions, and beliefs, man's science that ultimately leads to its own destruction and disproves itself. Therefore, it is not eternal, and if it is not eternal, it is not real. And as I destroy the matrix by being present to the present and consciously aware that omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence left no space for anything other than itself to exist, I can step into doing a process called the R&R, relax and receive, because I know that willpower is an animal propensity. I don't have to crush anything. I don't have to kill anything or anyone. I don't have to step on people to get ahead. I don't have to explode my business income, because I don't have to pay attention at all to any of the lusts of the five senses. All I have to do is recognize the truth, and the only action I have to take to activate the vibration is to imagine that I'm floating in a pool of water, and I let go of all of my body completely in order for the water to support me, in order for life to support itself. Now pay attention to what I just spoke to you. Life supports itself, and that is the truth of being. Omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence left no room and no time and no space for anything other than itself. Therefore, life supports itself when we are not in the way by projecting a time-space reality. If we circumcise time, then we also remove fear, because thinking is rooted in time, and thinking derives from fear. And it is the source of resistance, and it is based on the knowledge of this world that is rooted in the temporal and not the eternal, and leads to its own destruction and brings about its own misery and suffering. All of man's suffering is rooted in his beliefs and opinions and lies. So I'm imagining myself floating in a pool of water, and now I can surrender, knowing that this is the process of obtainment. You see, the surrender is the process of the obtainment of the desire. I repeat one more time, pay close attention to me. The floating in the water technique, imagining myself to be supported by the water itself, holding me, carrying me upstream or downstream, taking me wherever I need to go in this moment. And the recognition that omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience has no adversary, has no other belief about you. It is knowing nothing other than itself, so it has no other belief about you, and it supports itself completely, 100%. It left no room for any lack or limitation, and its very nature is the nature of increase. And when I have established this truth firmly in my consciousness, rooting it through the body, what I call the body, as I know that I'm surrendered, I have obtained the desire. Surrender is being in control. And willpower is an act of faith stemming from being out of control. Willpower is an animal propensity. So while the Matrix programs everyone to kill it, crush it, go out and attack the day, and they're all trying to get something out of someone or something, I instead do the opposite, and I come from the blessing. If I imagine myself floating in a pool of water, relaxed and receiving, allowing life to support me, because life is me and life supports itself, I can circumcise time off of the time-space reality, and I can be at one with the only power, presence, and mind. And the demonstration is always the fulfillment of goodness, joy, peace, love, and plenty. And I use my tongue to declare the works of God only. I use my tongue to declare the works of God only. While others in my perception through my five sense reality may appear to be speaking their violence and living in the curse, because the spoken word is the only physical thing in the universe, and every word that came out of the mouth of God was created. I refrain from using my tongue to cast myself into a hell, in spite of what my five senses tell me is real. I declare the works of the Lord, of God, that only the good is true. I am forever in the blessing, and I come from the blessing. When I show up in the world, I show up in the blessing. Last week, I planted the largest tithe I ever have on a Friday, and I looked at my bank account today and I saw more money in there than I expected. You see, my five senses see what is not, and God will demonstrate what is under the covenant. God can add from a subtraction. God can multiply from division. You can live on 90% or 70 or 60 or 50 better than you can on 100 when you're in the blessing and not the curse. The curse comes from living according to the five senses in the time, space, reality, and the blessing comes from circumcising time, being in the space, reality, and surrendering into the present. Relax, allow yourself to imagine floating in a pool of water, allowing life to support itself, and then coming from the blessing. You could say, I am the servant of God because I come from the blessing. And when I come from the blessing, I am the blessing, and I am the blessed. I am the blessing, and I am the blessed. I've stepped out of the cursed that does the cursing, and I am the blessing that comes from the blessed. We had an exercise in the workshop that we just did and everyone was challenged to go out and do rejection therapy. In other words, to get rejected and to ask for something or to get something that's making them uncomfortable. Now, I didn't create that lesson, but here's what I did with that lesson. You see, that lesson comes from the five senses. That lesson comes from the mind. The mind believes that it has competition. The mind believes that it has an adversary, oftentimes stronger than God itself. The mind has no reality. It is in fiction, and it creates all of the struggle and all of the strife on the planet. It's insane by its very nature. So as I got quiet in my truck, and I decided that I would accomplish this mission easily, effortlessly, and automatically, because God never knew anything about failure. Therefore, every action I align with that comes from the blessing. You see, when I come from the blessing, there can be nothing known of failure. So I've immediately stepped out of the five sense mind, and I've stepped into God's presence, God's power, and God's mind as God's servant. And as I walked into the restaurant, I said, "Okay, God, I am forever your servant. Where is love present? Where is the sign of your goodness in the appearance of the five sense illusion I am in?" You see, joy is the reward for discerning the divine blessing in the immediate moment. Thank you, Mike Murdoch, for that one. So I looked for the joy in the immediate moment, and as I witnessed a young family in their place of joy, I saw the presence of God through the five senses. And I celebrated that moment for about 5 minutes, just observing how this young couple had so much joy with this, must have been a 1-year-old daughter. And they had one of their fathers along. I don't know if it was the father of the guy or the girl, or it could have even been a friend for all I know. I had no information about who the gentleman was with this couple. But I saw the smiles on their faces, and I saw the goodness that God is. And as I witnessed that, I decided I come from the blessing because I am blessed to be a blessing, and it creates a prosperity cycle. And so instead of asking what I could get or get away with or appease my mind through some belief in willpower or obtainment through my own understanding, I trusted wholeheartedly in God's goodness. I followed that string of invisible connection to God through that experience, like grabbing onto a rope and pulling myself up in consciousness. I walked over to the table and I looked at the family and I decided to bless them. And I asked the waitress, I said, "Excuse me, this check that you have from them, can I take care of that check?" And everybody looked shocked. And I said, "Listen, it's not a big deal. I'm a minister, and I'm celebrating God's blessing. And as a blessing, I would love to bless this family. No strings attached. See the irony of that? I have a string attached because I have a rope that I'm hanging on to God with, and I'm clinging to it because I know the source of the blessing is to come from the blessing and to be the blessing. And yet, according to my five senses, I require no strings attached. I have no wants, I have no needs, I have no lacks. I am surrendered like my body's floating in a pool of water. I'm in the flow with God, acting as God in the blessing. And tears came out of the waitress's eyes, and the family wrote me a note that the waitress ended up giving me before I left, and the joy abounds. It was a miraculous moment to the five senses of everyone involved, because the five senses were just given a glimpse of God's blessing. You see, that's what it means to be a blessing and come from the blessing. And according to what my time-bound mind says, a few days later, I look at my bank account, and my bank account is bursting with increase, and I don't have a clue where it came from. I don't care, because according to wisdom, it's God's presence, because God has already poured out the full blessing. I don't have to pray to God. I praise God, and I come from the blessing. And more of God's presence becomes known to my five senses, because that's the prosperity cycle. Listen to this again and again. And your world will become blessed as you step into being the blessing. Selah.